Hello and welcome to DLA Piper's interview series Future Insurer, in which we deal with the issues and topics that will shape the development of the global insurance industry. My name is Heike Schmitz and I'm welcoming today Butch Bacani, who leads UNEP-FI's Principles for Sustainable Insurance. In the next minutes, Butch and I will discuss how ESG, sustainability and climate change will shape the insurance industry going forward. Butch, it is a great pleasure to have you here today, and it would be very interesting as a starter into this interview to hear what are your most ambitious projects currently.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm Butch Bacani. I lead the UN Environment Program's Principles for Sustainable Insurance. It's the largest collaborative initiative between the United Nations and the global insurance industry. Currently, we're nearly approaching 200 members around the world, including insurance companies representing a quarter of world premium volume and $14 trillion in assets under management. As far as our priorities are concerned, we have a number. The first one is the recently established Net Zero Insurance Alliance, which will look into transitioning insurance and reinsurance underwriting portfolios to net zero emissions. Second one is supporting the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, which is about transitioning investment portfolios to net zero emissions. Third is supporting and implementing the recommendations of the Financial Stability Board's climate risk disclosure recommendations, or the TCFD recommendations, across the insurance business. Fourth is helping the most vulnerable countries around the world, represented by the Vulnerable 20 Group of Ministers of Finance, 48 of the most climate vulnerable countries, to protect micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in their respective economies through insurance protection, because MSMEs are at the backbone of their economies. Fifth, as well, is implementing the first ever ESG guide that the PSI developed last year for the insurance business. And then shaping and supporting the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN by creating a set of insurance SDGs. And finally, shaping the global agenda for sustainability for the life and health insurance industry.
Thank you, Butch. This is indeed a very ambitious program, and it covers basically everything that we are going to discuss today. So happy to dive in a bit deeper. You spoke about climate change. You spoke about support to vulnerable countries, to vulnerable companies. It seems that insurance plays a pretty important or really important role in relation to embedding sustainability and ensuring the transformation to more sustainable communities, economy and societies. But what is it exactly that insurers can contribute to this?
Yes, the master narrative of the Principles for Sustainable Insurance, or the PSI, is simple. We want to harness the full role and potential of the insurance industry as risk managers, insurers, and investors for economic, social, and environmental sustainability or sustainable development. So as risk managers, what can insurance companies do given its expertise in understanding, managing, and reducing risk? Anything that has to do with risk modeling, risk analytics, anything that will help prevent and reduce losses is the first port of call that insurance companies can do. Secondly, insurance or risk transfer. This has two roles. The role of insurers in absorbing financial shocks when disasters do happen, and there's more frequent and more severe extreme weather events happening these days because of climate change. The other one is the role of insurance in de-risking investments into a sustainable economy. So making sure that these investments are protected also with insurance as we transition to a more sustainable economy. And the third is the role of insurers as institutional investors. Globally, the insurance industry has over 36 trillion in global assets under management. So the way that capital is invested will have a telling impact on sustainable development, whether that's directed towards sustainable companies and practices, or whether it goes the other way to unsustainable development. So taking three roles combined as a risk manager, insurer, and investor makes the insurance industry uniquely positioned to be a lever for sustainable development.
You touched on the role of regulators and policymakers. Is there something that needs to be done? Are the current regulatory frameworks actually fit to integrate climate change and more generally ESG issues and sustainability into product underwriting? Or are these boundaries too limited? Do we need more changes to that?
For me, the basic agenda that has to change is evolving from the traditional concept of view of insurance. The traditional view of insurance is simply about if you're insured, that's good. You're covered, you're protected. However, the question that's increasingly being asked right now is what assets are you insuring and how are you insuring them? So, for example, are you insuring assets that are damaging and destroying the environment? Or in the process of insurance transactions, are you violating human rights? These are issues that have traditionally been asked within the investment domain. And that's the reason why you have more sustainability frameworks and guidance across asset classes in the investment context.
We are on the verge of the next climate summit in Glasgow, and obviously a lot of what you mentioned relates to net zero and climate change mitigation. But many topics you've mentioned previously also relate to larger ESG issues and topics. What else is there on the horizon except for climate change?
Right. So there's a lot on the horizon. So the two very foundations of life on this planet is a stable climate and a rich biodiversity of life. And on both counts, the environmental dimension of what makes the planet livable as it is right now are under threat based on latest science. And that's the reason why this year it's not only going to be the climate conference in Glasgow. We'll also have the biodiversity conference in Kunming in China, which will then determine the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So the nature agenda is key as well. So this is making sure that we halt biodiversity loss and that we stop the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. So that goes hand in hand with climate change and the agenda of pollution. So together, climate change, nature loss, and pollution are the three crises that are facing at the planetary scale that we must address to make sure that we have a sustainable future. And obviously, that intersects with all of this. So we have to make sure that as we insure and invest, that human rights and human dignity are respected, that there is also a real effort to bridge the protection gap and to address social inequality. Because ultimately, the sustainability agenda is not simply about protecting the environment or protecting the planet. It's about protecting ourselves and making sure that humanity has a fighting chance for a sustainable, safe, and resilient future.
Yes, to protect humanity, not to protect the environment or protect nature as such. I understand that. It's quite interesting because in one of our previous discussions, you've said that in particular issues of climate change hit the South more than the North. So it's important that insurers and other players globally also use their potential to support the South in overcoming the challenges that arise in connection with climate change, because obviously it's not a singular topic. Climate change leads to social issues, leads to human rights issues, leads to increase of poverty. You mentioned the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the contribution insurance can make. So it's quite difficult because it's so multifaceted. Coming back to the question of underwriting, do you underwrite? Don't you underwrite? How do you make sure that you support a transition in a way that no one is left behind? I conceive that to be a very difficult question to implement in the practice. Is there any guidance you can offer from your experience how to deal with that? Is it better not to insure? Is it better to engage? How could insurance companies navigate this issue?
So I think the answer is there are different approaches to get to a sustainable behavior and practices. So exclusion is one form of it. So I think whether on investment or insurance, I think one key step is to make sure that the whole economy transitions to net zero and being nature positive. So in doing that, you need to start engaging with your clients and ask them what is their transition pathway to make sure that they are net zero and then they are contributing to a nature positive economy. And I think exclusion, divestment, or disengagement from insurance is a means when engagement fails. At the same time, I think this is not simply about a direction to sustainability. It's a direction guided by science. And we need to bear in mind that science is telling us that we are approaching tipping points that may become irreversible at some point. So if you have a planetary emergency in front of us, then what is science demanding that for us to do in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and nature loss? For example, if you follow the net zero transition pathway of the International Energy Agency, they're saying that their net zero transition pathway does not include new investments in fossil fuel supply. And so if you follow that, will you still, as an insurance company, continue to do that in the future? Or are you actually going to be guided by science and say that is actually something not in line with a net zero transition pathway? And there are difficult choices to be made here. At the same time, on the upside opportunities, there's going to be a monumental and historic shift towards low and zero emission technologies. And this presents to the insurance industry future risk pools to insure going forward. And so there is a potential for insurers to be caught in technologies of the past without looking at the massive opportunity in front of them to be able to insure and manage risks related to low and zero emission technologies that we would need in order to achieve a net zero emissions future.
I could continue to ask you many more questions, but I think we have to come to our last question. Now, if you were an insurance CEO in the position of having to implement sustainability in your organization, and you're willing and you're looking at the double materiality concept, what would be the three most important things you would have to do to start the process?
Yes, so I think number one is I want to create and cultivate a culture of sustainability within my company. And that means having a very compelling sustainability strategy for the entire company. And for me as CEO to lead by example by practicing what I preach. Second is that I will commit my company's insurance and investment portfolios to net zero emissions. I will also commit both my insurance and investment portfolios to making sure that they are nature positive in their impact and not leading to nature loss. And third is that I will do my very best as CEO to make sure that my company innovates to help protect the most vulnerable, because we will not achieve sustainable development if there's no social equity out there. We cannot leave people behind. And that's actually the underlying principle of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. One of the underlying tenets is to leave no one behind. And to be able to do that, the industry and my company and myself has to continuously innovate to reach out to the most vulnerable first.
Thank you, Butch. And I know that you are relentless in doing the reaching out and repeating your missions and statement. And I thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for the interview today. It has been a great pleasure. I'm looking forward to speaking to you again.
Me too. Thank you so much.